Alrighty, it's about that time again. Hey everybody, Steve here, the retired hobby tech guy, American expat here in Korea. And today we're going to be talking about real estate, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Oh, excuse me. A little bit of the differences here in Korea versus the United States in regards to rental options, how many people live in apartments versus homes. What is kind of the norm here? How often people move in Korea? There's some people that seem to have this idea that Koreans are still house poor and that there's not a lot of home ownership. And I don't know. We're going to take a look at some numbers and see how it compares to the United States. And we might find some very interesting information that will open up a lot of eyes and say, well, wow, maybe Korea's not as provincial as they once thought. Yeah, it just kind of interesting perusing social media and things like that. I've noticed a lot of people, especially military service members and their families and stuff like that. They come, they get stationed in Korea, or perhaps they're contractors. They live a few years in Korea and they think that they know everything there is to know about Korea. I've seen a lot of social justice warriors, getting all riled up about the fact that there's no tipping in Korea and, you should tip your servers. And there's actually a thing in Korea where tipping is not normal. Matter of fact, if you go into the local economy, not the economies that are right outside the military bases, the fast food places, they have tip jars and things like that. But once you get away from the military bases, tipping is not really a thing. It is, matter of fact, it was considered rude at one time because it implies that there is a hierarchy, that I am better than you and I'm giving you a tip because you're such a low class employee or a person or so on and so forth. So tipping wasn't really a thing. And then there's the fact that Koreans in restaurants, they pay their workers a better wage than what we do in the United States, which thankfully, according to the big beautiful bill that the present administration has passed, is that tips are not taxable, which is finally a good thing. But even then, that's a step in the right direction, but I don't think it's a step. There needs to be a few more steps, because I would say take a page out of the book of Korea, pay the servers a wage, and don't rely on tips. And tips, if you get a tip, that's great, But like I said, I've seen a lot of people say, we need to tip Koreans because they're poor and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, I expect that for a lot of people that don't understand Korea. And the same applies when we're talking about real estate. So we're going to talk about real estate here. I'm going to reference some notes because I've been studying up on this. And of course, living in Korea and being retired in Korea does make a huge difference. And then especially when you dive into the details and the particulars of this, you find some really interesting information. Now, we're going to start off and we're going to talk about renting in Korea, usually compared to the United States. Now, if you're not from the United States, let me explain or just rehash how that works. Usually, you'll put down a deposit on a property, usually worth 1 or 2 months worth of the rent, maybe a few $100s as a security deposit in case there's any damage when you move out. How clean the property is, and then if it's cleaned and it's well kept, then you usually get your security deposit back, and your first and last month's rent, that deposit. Or it can be applied as the first and last month's rent. So it really kind of depends. With that said, you usually have a monthly rent. Now, the majority of the people that rent in the United States, that is how they operate. They pay a monthly fee, and then on top of that, they can pay utilities. If you have apartment complexes and villas and things like that, sometimes you'll get electricity added to that. So there is a little bit of relief with that. But yeah, still, you're going to pay electricity, you're going to pay trash, you're going to pay gas and things like that, your internet, a lot of things that you're going to have added on to your monthly rent in the United States. So the question is, how does that compare with Korea? Well, in Korea, they have monthly rent. That is kind of picking up speed, but the majority of Koreans don't pay a monthly rent. Yeah, about 70% of Koreans do not pay a monthly rent. They just pay their utilities and their regular bills. And you might be saying, what is this magic that you speak? I would love to, you know, rent and not pay rent. How is that possible? Well, it's called jeonse. And jeonse is a way that you can rent a property, but you're going to have a single massive lump sum deposit. And this deposit that you're going to, excuse me, give to the landlord is going to be huge. It is going to be anywhere from 50 to 80% of the retail price of the property, of the sale price of the property. So if you're looking at, let's just pull out the calculator here, and let's say $500,000, and we multiply that by, let's just put it in the middle, and we'll put 70%. You're going to be putting down $350,000. Yeah, that on the low end, 500,000. We're going to throw, oops, a little bit too many there, 500,000, and let's say it's just 50%. That's going to come out to 250,000. So that huge, giant, monstrous deposit of 250 or 500,000 or whatever it is, based on the sale price of the property, is going to allow you're going to hand that huge deposit, a huge amount of money, over to the landlord, and then the landlord is going to invest it and use it, and for a contract of 2 years, you get to live in that property rent-free. You pay your utilities. Sometimes some landlords will include water, electricity, things of that nature, because they're not as expensive. Some will, some won't, so it kind of depends. But usually you'll have to pay for city gas, for heat and stuff like that. Air conditioning, kind of depends on the landlord. But really, you're putting down a huge chunk of money, and in exchange for that, you get to live in the property rent-free. Now, you might say, well, whoa, that's really bad. That's like crazy. Well, yeah, but if you can save up the money to get that down payment, then for the next 2 to 4 years, because in Korea they have this law, it's called the 2+2 law, where if you do a jeonse contract, your initial term is for 2 years. And then the government says, well, we want some stability for our people. So they made it a law and said, well, if you do 2 years and then it's time to renew, the landlord has to keep it at that same price for the next 2 years. So you get a total of 4 years. This is good in one way. On one side of the coin, it was like, yeah, it provides some stability. People, don't have to move every 2 years. They're good for 4, and it gives them, again, 4 years to build and aggressively save money so that they can go and purchase their own apartment or property. On the other side, there's always two sides, the pros and the cons. The con to this is that landlords have gotten smart, and because of the law, they have charged a little bit more for their deposit. So you get 6 of one, half dozen of the other. It's kind of a wash, is basically what comes out. But if I had to make a determination, I would say it's a little bit better, because at least it guarantees you 4 years in one place. So, and usually what we end up seeing in Korea is that people generally tend to move every 4 years, 2 to 4 years, depending, but with the 2+2 law, it ends up about every 4 years. How does that compare to the United States? Well, in the United States, the average person in the United States, so we were talking 350 million people and all of that, high, middle, low income, the whole 9 yards, throwing them all together, you're looking at about every 7 to 8 years that people move in the United States. But then you might say, oh, well, that's a lot better. But then when you look at the mortgage and you see how often people buy properties and move, we get a little bit of a different information, because then we're looking at, less, maybe about 4 or 5 years, and then people buy a home. And the statistics are a little bit skewed, because that could be due to refinancing, or people just move and buy another house. So, yeah, it's there. There is some stability in both of those. But we have to remember that in Korea, this is normal. So when we look at it from our Western eyes and our Western point of view, we think, oh, how terrible it is to move every 2 to 4 years. Oh, the sky is falling. Oh, the poor Korean people. That's the norm. So they don't see that as being bad, or it is what it is. It's, you know, if they went to the United States, there'd be things in the United States that Koreans see that are like, oh, that makes sense, or why do they do that? That's so weird. That's so odd. Because they have their own way of doing things that they grew up in here in Korea. So, yeah, we've got that going on. But a huge deposit, 60 to 80% of the retail price of the property is for the jeonse, but you don't have a monthly rent. So usually within that 2 to 4 years, if people are working, say you got a husband and wife, they're both working, they're aggressively saving their money, and then at the end of that 4 years, with the money they saved up, plus the return of their huge deposit, they can go and purchase property, usually an apartment. And another interesting difference between the United States and Korea is that Korea ends up 70% of the people live in apartments. So single family homes aren't really a thing like they are in the United States, because that is the end all be all of the United States, is get yourself a single family home, the 2.5 kids, the dog, the house, the car, the bass boat, or whatever it is. And that is the American dream. Here in Korea, yeah, it's a different dream. So still has housing and stuff like that, but the ways that they go about it and how they do it is a little bit different. And also, Koreans will move more often, not just because of the rental contracts, like with jeonse, and they have another one as wolse, which is a lower deposit, but yet you pay a monthly fee or apartment rent, but it's not as much as a full amount, full monthly rent, if that kind of makes sense. But Koreans move a lot more, and especially as younger generations, to it's for the children. It's for the children. It really, really is. Koreans will move to different places, so that their kids can get a better education, go to areas that have better schools, that have better hagwons, or, tutoring classes after school, places that have, highly respected hagwons in schools, and that parents will look through and they'll look at the testing scores to see how well, and the reviews of the schools and the tutors and so on and so forth that they have, and they will move because there are certain areas that are better for elementary school, middle school, high school, so on and so forth. So there's a lot of moving going along in Korea because of that aspect of life. That's normal. You do things for your children so that they can get a better education, and that's going to require going to a good preschool, good middle, elementary, middle, high school, so on and so forth. So you're talking about moving around a lot anyway. So for the people that come to Korea, military family members, contractors, their families, and so on and so forth, who see all of this moving around, and they're like, oh, woe is the poor Koreans, the downtrodden. And it's like, it's just a totally different system, and you don't understand it. It is totally expected and normal to move to help educate your kids and give them the best options and opportunities available. So that is the norm here. So it just is what it is. Don't feel like Korea's downtrodden, because they're not. Korea has done a lot. I mean, imagine back in 1950 to 1953 was the Korean War, and how far they have come from being dirt poor to being a very huge economy in the world, and how far they've come in technology, medicine, all of these areas, education. It's just amazing on how far and how fast they have come. Some people do say that they've gone too fast, too quick, and that could hurt them. But, it is what it is. So, everybody can armchair quarterback and, well, if Korea did this back then, it would have been different. Well, yeah, everybody can armchair quarterback. So, but it is what it is. The other rental option that they have is called Wolsey, where you end up taking a percentage, and we're going to take let me do this because I think this will help. I think this little chart that I made up will help. And let's kind of throw this in here. Boom! And then we'll move me over here. So here is the chart, and you can see some of the stuff going on with the Jonesay. And the first column shows the feature, the concept, the deposit percentage, and rent and all of that stuff. For Jonesay, we see this. Let's say this is based on about an apartment that's about $750,000. We bought ours for $250,000, but again, it was at a huge discount. So again, it depends on where you buy. If you're in Seoul and Gangnam, you're going to be paying premium prices, whereas if you're further away and kind of like the area that we're at, or even other areas, you could get an apartment for 220 million won. So let's take a look at 220 million won. I want to say it's divided by exchange rate is about 1350 now. So that's not right. That's 220 million. There we go. And we divide that by 1350. What that ends up being is about $165,000 for a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. So it really depends on where you go, and people that say, oh, real estate is so expensive. Well, most real estate prices that are referenced in news articles are in Seoul, or talking about Gangnam, or things like that. So it doesn't encompass the entirety of Korea, which kind of gives kind of a biased view. So with that, I took $750,000 for an apartment, and again, you could see in the Jonesay with the 60 to 80% for the deposit. That's a huge amount of money. So you're looking at $460,000, but there's no monthly rent. Whereas you compared to Wolsey, there is a security deposit, but it's usually less. So it's like 10 or 20 times the monthly rent, and it's kind of a weird thing. So like in this example of $750,000, your deposit would be about 38 grand, which is definitely a lot less than 460. So, but you have a monthly rent that is about 3 million won, or about $2,300. So, there's different ways of renting, and again, you need to save up money. But what I do like the fact is that it's a tiered system, so you're just not locked into one. So in the United States, we have one system, and usually it's based on your credit score and your credit worthiness, things like that. So I like the fact that Korea has a tiered system to allow for reduced rent or no rent, but it's all based upon saving a lot of money. So with that, it's kind of an interesting thing. So in that, let's get back here. Boom. So in that, being retired here in Korea in real estate, the good part is you have different ways in which you can rent properties. Now you have the Jonesay, you have the Wolsey, but you also have monthly rent as well. It's not as much as percentage-wise in regards to the Jonesay, which is about, if I remember correctly, about 70% of the Korean people use Jonesay. That's huge. So with that amount of money, staying in a place every 2 to 4 years, and then you move to another place, people say, the instability of not being able, of having to move all the time, and so on and so forth. Again, go back to the education of your children. But the Weiss family has family members who have lived in the same place for 20 years. And there's a lot of people like that. There's a lot of seniors that own their own properties, which is actually a little bit more on the low income side than the United States low income older people. Surprisingly so. So when we start peeling back the details of real estate here in Korea and who owns what and how much and so on and so forth, we really get a different picture, and people start to realize that Korea is not as poor and provincial as they thought. Korea is pretty on it. in my opinion. But then again, I'm retired here, so my wife has Korean ancestry, so I'm a little biased. Just go figure. Yeah, it is interesting because about 60% of the Koreans are middle class, about 20% are low income earners, and the remaining 20 are about high income earners, which is kind of similar with the United States, because in the United States what you end up having is middle class of about 50% and low is at about 29. So actually Korea has a little bit better going on for the low class than we do in the United States. But then again, there's a huge disparity in that because we have 350 plus million people in the United States versus 50 million people in Korea. Again, it's all numbers and math. But yeah, housing costs, and recently somebody brought up how poor it is for Koreans to move around. And I've had a number of people say this, and actually I was working on this information because I was going to do a video, because in the past I've had like 4 or 5 people mention this and shoot me emails and stuff. Other social media outlets, people have said, oh, Korea's so bad because you have to move around so much and it's bad for the children. And it's like, no, they're actually doing it for the children. You just haven't been here long enough, or you don't know, and that's fine. It's okay to not know, but this video is to help educate people and kind of shine a light on Korean real estate. So yeah, really kind of some interesting stuff when we talk about real estate in Korea. But it does have some high housing costs. It does have high housing costs when compared to how much money the low, middle, and high income earners make. So the other thing, going back to the real estate and the jeonse, and the term or the contract for that is every 2 years. So let's say you put down your huge deposit, you live there for 2 years. The government ended up deciding that, yeah, we need a little bit more stability in that area. Excuse me, and we need to give some relief. So what they ended up doing was called the 2+2 law. And in other words, if you do jeonse, or you rent for 2 years and you do a 2-year contract, if you want to renew after that, the landlord has to give you the same price for the next 2 years. So in other words, it's kind of a fixed rent type of thing, but it's a variable. It's not set in stone, not like the New York thing where the fixed rents and it stays like that forever, and it kind of is punishment to the landlord because you have higher expenses and costs and maybe refinancing, and so they can't afford to give such low rents. It just seems like a little bit of a government overreach to me. But with Korea, at least they had a more manageable system to give some relief. So as you're renting that place out, and let's say you renew your jeonse for another 2 years, so that's a total of 4. In that 4 years, you can aggressively save money. And at the end of that 4 years, the amount of money that you save, let's say a husband and wife work, the money you save, plus you get back that huge deposit, that allows you to purchase an apartment. And yeah, you'll still have some monthly payment, but it's a good way to do things, and it promotes savings. But with that, you have people that will still mortgage in Korea, they're considered real estate rich and cash poor in many places. So yeah, a lot of people are mortgaged, but then again, to the hilt, and same thing in the United States. So it is what it is. But we've had family members who, thinking, oh, moving around is so bad. We've had family members who've lived in apartments for, 20 plus years. So there's a lot of people that do that. And retirees will often have, and seniors will often have properties that they own the property that they're in. Or it's just, the grandma, the grandpa, or whatever living in a place. Grandpa kicks off, and then it's just, grandma, and she is living in a small house. Usually they're able to purchase that, and home ownership in Korea is kind of a thing, and it's kind of surprising as well. So when we take a look at some things like home ownership, for example, 48% of low-income people in Korea own their own home. Wrap your head around that. Compare that to the United States, which is 34%. So there's a big difference between home ownership when we're talking about low income in Korea versus the United States. Now, when we talk about middle class, about 62% of people in Korea own their homes, and 87% of the high income own their homes or apartments. Where in the U.S., respectively, you're looking at about 67% and 91%. So in that light, or the comparison from Korea to the United States, low-income Koreans are doing better than low-income Americans. So, and in a shorter amount of time. So, hats off to Korea and all the stuff that they've ended up doing in regards to real estate and renting and all that stuff. With that being said, they do have single family homes here in Korea. They have villas, kind of like duplexes. They have 8plexes, 12-unit apartment buildings, and so on and so forth. And then they have the massive apartment buildings that are, our apartment complex. There's, I think, like 900 and so units here. But there are still single family homes. Some people live out in the country, and so as more seniors that were farmers and in agriculture, they've gotten older and passed away. A lot of those properties are, nobody wants them. So there is kind of a little bit of a surge in Koreans buying what they call power homes, or single family homes out in the country in smaller cities and towns, and they'll do the commute. Usually that's for the older Koreans will have the idea or the goal of, I just want to get away. I want to live in the country. I want to have my vegetable garden. I want to have some chickens and go fishing, and that's what I want to do. So there's a little bit of a resurgence in that aspect. Younger Koreans are kind of doing that, but not as much as what we would see in the United States. In the United States, it's more prevalent that people would buy properties that are away from big cities and so on and so forth. They don't mind that. Single home ownership is the American dream. In the Korea dream, it's more for the children and getting them a good education. And then where you live seems to take a second place to that. So, real estate in Korea is very, very interesting. The bad thing, and probably the ugly, is the high prices of real estate, and it just keeps going up and up and up. And unfortunately, with a bad economy, this is having it's going to get rough. It's going to get rough here in the next few years, especially when you have a government administration that is kind of liberal, that wants to give money away. Let's pay off people's debts. Let's do all kinds of things for people, which requires raising taxes, which entails creating money, and then you have to borrow money to make money, and then you have an interest rate, and you just kind of kick that can down the road. In Korea is actually getting to a place of where their government debt is like at 49%. And according to Korean law, their cap is at 50%. So they are really pushing the limit on what they're going to do. And unfortunately, as I talked about in a previous video, they want to give like everybody 150,000 won, starting with lower income people first, and then later on, and then it's like a tiered system thing, which is, the sentiment of that is good, but you give a one-time payment of basically $110 or so. That's not going to have a huge effect on the economy, as I think they think it will have. Really, $100, what do you, think about it. In the United States, what are you going to do with $100? You could go out and eat a meal with you and your wife. If you got a kid or two, there's $100 right there. You're talking $25, anywhere from $15 to $20 per adult, for a meal, and you got two adults and a couple of kids, and next thing you know, that $100 is gone. Or maybe you go to the grocery store and you buy a few eggs. Egg prices have gotten really better. But, again, think about that in Korea. Even though prices are less here in Korea, that $100 is just going to be a blip on the screen. And that's not going to address some of the problems with the increasing high prices of property and real estate. I don't know the answer to this. I'm not for government control of properties, because we see in places like New York with rent controls, when the government gets involved, it's really not good for investors, and then they keep raising taxes. And the more stuff you keep giving away, that has to be fueled by the taxpayers. And eventually, like New York or California, you keep raising taxes and all this stuff, and eventually people are like, I'm taxed to death. See ya, I'm moving. And I don't want Korea to get into that. And thankfully they haven't. I think Korea is at a place where everything kind of revolves around Seoul. So their dream, a lot of people's dream in Korea, I won't say everybody, but a lot of people's dream is to go and live in Seoul. Because that's the place where everything happens. And so other cities aren't as looked up to as Seoul. And so I think if Koreans kind of got out of this keeping up with the Joneses type of thing, and they started focusing on investing and saving more, a lot of Koreans, like people in the United States, are like, you only live once, so I'm going to buy the Gucci, the Prada, the Nike, the this, the that. I'm going to get the new car, the new phone every time one comes out. You're just kind of throwing money away by financing all these things. And then you drive the car for a couple of years, and then you buy another brand new car because, Lord forbid, it looks like you're poor. When you drop your kids off at school, you don't want the other families and teachers and the other kids to think that your kid is poor, so you have to keep up this Joneses or keeping up with the Kims type of thing, and financing. And it just doesn't work that way. But the good thing is with Korea, they're real estate rich but cash poor. So they pour a lot of their savings into real estate, and it's seen as a very good investment vehicle. But I think what we're going to end up seeing is and like I've said before in previous videos over the years, is that there's going to be some corrections, and there have been corrections in real estate. But usually in Seoul, in like Gangnam, in the higher end areas of Seoul, which usually get the most press, is that the prices just keep rising. But there has been some laws made with like loan restrictions and things like that have absolutely cut apartment purchases more than 50% within a month because of this new law. So that is going to take a huge ding. So I think people canceled contracts on apartments that they were buying. So these people weren't even grandfathered in when this law came out, which I think they should have done. But these people ended up saying, well, this law is here, it's not good, I'm going to cancel my contract, I'm going to forfeit my deposit. That's kind of rough. So it's just not good. So I think there's going to be a reaction to that, and real estate and sales, and even I just read an article on apartments being built, new apartment complexes being built, and apartments being completed. They're all scheduled to go downhill because of this new law and the things that are going on. So whenever you have a government that wants to give a bunch of money to a bunch of people, it results in higher taxes, it doesn't really help, because it's just an artificial blip on the screen. What would seem to make more sense is to lower the tax rate, so that way you have a prolonged increase of income. So if you're taxing me at 30%, say in the United States, I get taxed at 30%, the current administration dropped the tax rate, and now I'm only paying 25%. That frees up 5% that now can go in my pocket, that I can put into savings, that I can put into investments, or I can just go and buy more stuff, which helps strengthen the economy. I don't know, it just seems like that to me. So you can use it to your advantage, or you can just piss it away. It really depends. But, when you start promising all these things as saying, we're going to pay off people's loans, we're going to give people money, and that's fine for, getting the populace behind you. Hey, he wants to give us free money. Everybody wants free stuff. But in the long term, I don't think people see the big picture when we're talking about that. And this will have an effect on real estate. So I think we're still going to see high real estate prices in Seoul and those high value areas. But in other places, I think eventually we're going to see a drop in real estate prices. but we won't for a little bit because of the new law that came into effect. So you're going to have those higher end properties, people are going to settle for lower price properties, which is going to increase the demand, which is going to increase the prices of those properties. So we'll see a little bit of and it's just kind of a weird thing on how this all works. So we'll have some ups, but then we'll have some downs. And then, depending on how the tariff negotiations pop up with the United States and Korea, that could have an effect as well. And that's going to be starting 1 August. As the letters go out, I think Trump ended up saying he sent out letters to Korea and Japan and other places to try to level and have fair trade agreements with tariffs. So, for example, Korea has, if I'm not mistaken, they have tariffs on the United States for agricultural stuff, and it's like 54 or 56%, something like that. Really? That's a huge tariff. And so what the current administration wants to do is lower that, and let's have an equal trade. I think that's a good thing when you have equal trade. But the past administrations in the United States have been, some places it's over 100% tariffs on some things, 50, 60, 70, 80% tariffs that the United States has to pay to other countries to get our stuff into their countries. But the other way, it's not as much. So it's really a one-sided thing. So I think it really comes down to fair trade, and that is better for everybody. I don't know. It's. I'm just looking at this from like a home budget, and if I do some business with my neighbor and he charges me 54%, and it's like, why are you charging me an extra 54%? When it goes the other way, it's only like 10% or whatever, or so what's the disconnect? I think everything ought to be a little bit more fair. That's just my opinion. I don't know. You wouldn't do it with your neighbor, probably shouldn't do it as government. That's all I'm saying. But yeah, very, very interesting. And the other thing about Korean real estate is that I don't think there's going to be really a housing shortage, because Korea is a super aged society. So kind of like in the United States, you got a ton of baby boomers that were the result of the end of World War II. And so everybody came home, knocked boots, and boom, had kids, and a lot of kids. And that's the largest demographic of the United States. And then the following generations get smaller and smaller and smaller. Here in Korea is exactly the same thing, as we have an aged or a super aged society, and the following generations, we don't have a lot of those, not as much as the older generations. So eventually the demand for real estate is going to go down at some point. And then, of course, the flip side of that is you're going to have taxes. It used to have a huge demographic that you could pull taxes from. You're not going to have the huge demographic because the following generations are smaller. So that could result in a rise in taxes, and which will probably be a rise in taxes for the younger generations, because the current administration is just kind of giving money out hand over fist. And I'm talking real, United States and Korea, any country that does this in the situation. When you give away money, you have to create that money, and to create that money, you have to borrow the money, and then the interest rates, it's just not efficient. And actually, in a previous video that I did, there was an opinion piece on this handout that here in Korea, the current president Lee wants to give everybody 150,000 won. But this guy went through and he did the efficiency of it and said, it's basically 0.3. So it's not really efficient as far as boosting up the economy as you think it would. It sounds great to the uneducated and the ignorant, and I'm ignorant and uneducated in a lot of things. Just ask my wife. But when we look at that, it's huge. And when you start giving the money away, and then he compared it to something else, I can't remember what it was, but it was like 0.86. So in other words, it was way more efficient to invest, or it was to lower taxes. That's what it was. To lower taxes to boost up the economy over the long term, instead of just a one-time payment, and you're incurring so much debt, and that debt, it's not like you pay it off at the end of the month. It's not like your credit card. I'm all for debt. Just pay it off at the end of the month. But governments that don't do that, that create that money, that millions and billions of dollars, or millions and trillions of won, billions of won, that's going to get refinanced. And they're never going to be able to pay it off, ever. The United States is never going to be able to pay off their debt. Korea is never going to be able to pay off their debt, and they're almost at that cap limit. So there's limited amount of stuff that they can do, and I think just giving everybody 150,000 won for a temporary little increase in the economy, one time or even two times, is really disingenuous, and it's not looking at the big picture, in my opinion. But and I live in Korea. I'm biased for Korea. I like the low crime rate. I like the hardworking aspect of Koreans. I like their respect. There's just a lot of things that I like about it. There are some things that I miss about Korea. I kind of miss having a single family home, but then again, I'm getting older. I'm going to be 59 this year in a few months, and I live in an apartment now. I own the apartment. No landscaping. I got underground parking. Everything's taken care of. I just, half the expenses of what I was paying in the United States. So it's kind of like as I get older, there's less work that I have to do. And usually in the United States, you get a single family home, you retire, you do all that, and eventually you downsize, and then you eventually downsize again, and then you go to assisted living facility, and then it just goes downhill from there. Here in Korea, with 70% of the people, 70% of the people living in apartments, the good thing is it's maintainable. And everything there, the walkability of where you're at, usually there's a grocery store, convenience stores that are within walking distance. So for seniors and elderly, being in Korea versus being in some places in the United States, it's more senior friendly here in Korea than the United States. Eventually you're going to get to a place where you're not going to be able to drive. Well, in Korea, they end up having, and I think it's age 65, if I'm not mistaken, you can get free bus passes. So instead of, they actually help out their senior citizens saying, hey, you did your time, we respect you, here's free bus passes for public transportation. So which is great. I really wish we'd see a thing like that in the United States. We have our senior citizens, we have people on Social Security, and God, I swear, every single year in the United States, what we end up seeing, the politicians, whoa, Social Security is, our seniors are going broke and blah, 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 and there's no relief. Nobody actually does things to benefit the people that are on Social Security, at least in the past, because a lot of them can't even make ends meet, barely make ends meet. With that being said, the current administration did give some relief to people on Social Security, which is like a first. I totally think if you're on Social Security, you shouldn't have to pay any income tax whatsoever. We're almost there. The bill that was passed gives some tax credits, so we're kind of inching towards that. But remember, back in the day when Social Security came out, and the first Social Security recipient was Ida Mae somebody, and she got the first Social Security. Social Security wasn't taxed. It wasn't until matter of fact, it was Joe Biden that voted to tax Social Security. So when he had all this stuff and said, oh, I'm all for seniors and helping out people with Social Security, he's the one that voted to tax them. So, yeah, how can you trust somebody like that? I don't know. But as an independent, there's a lot of Republicans that you can't trust either. So, there's that. Let's just leave it at that. But back to real estate in Korea. I think real estate in Korea is a good investment if you're going to be here for the long term. And if you're in a position where you can buy with cash, getting financing in Korea as a foreigner is really rough. I will say that. We bought our apartment outright, so we didn't have to worry about that. But then again, to do that, we worked a lot of jobs. We bought the worst house on the block, and we saved and we sold and tax-free profits, and we rolled that money into the next property, paid down the mortgage. We both worked jobs, and we threw money at our mortgage until we paid it off. And then we moved to Korea. So we were able to take that tax-free money and buy our apartment, which is a huge, that is the biggest savings that we have out of all of our categories. is not having that monthly rent or mortgage or things like that. And I don't even know, does anybody know the percentage of how many people pay off their mortgage? Let me open AI. Welcome to AI Studio. How many U.S. citizens pay off their mortgage on their primary residence as a percentage? This will be interesting because I know it's not a lot. I'm going to say it's probably 3-4%. So let's take a look see and see what this pops up. It's thinking. How many people pay off their mortgage? I'm going to say like 3%. And again, it's AI, so Lord knows how accurate it is, but it's definitely getting better. So this is an excellent question. Why, thank you. Approximately 40% of all owner-occupied homes are owned free and clear, meaning they do not have a mortgage. What? 40%? That is crazy. Look at that. That 40%, if this is true, that is crazy. Total owner-occupied housing units, 85.8 million. Owner with mortgages, 54 million, about 60%. Owned free and clear is about 34 million. So, yeah, that's interesting. Wow, I never would have guessed that. And then by age, you're seeing 45%. So 8, 15, 27, 45, 62 with these respective age brackets. So, yeah, kind of interesting. Colorado, 30%. States with the lowest percentage of home-free mortgage owners. So I was part of that 30%. Interesting. Yeah. Wow. I wonder how it's about. Let's change this to Korea and see what this comes out as. This will be interesting. And usually what I'll end up doing is referencing Korean articles that gauge. Maybe if I spelled that right, it might help a little bit. But yeah, the interesting thing, usually the information that I put out is based on my own experience. It'll be based on articles or information that I can get here in Korea that are accessible online. AI stuff, I'll throw some stuff at AI and then I'll try to find information to verify the veracity of that stuff. And yeah, that'll be interesting. So let's see what we end up seeing here. Oh, let's check out and see what this says. Direct one-to-one comparison statistic like owned free and clear number from the U.S. is not commonly tracked in the same way in Korea. However, by analyzing the available data, the short answer is about 30 to 35% of Korean homeowners own their primary residence without a mortgage or other related debt. It's noticeably lower than the 40% figure of the United States. Wow. Okay. Well, the Johns say that's a little bit different. That's a rental option. So, based on 2023 survey, 61.3% of Korean households own their home. This is the group that we're analyzing. Households with debt is about 63.3%, some form of financial debt to homeowners. So, yeah, a lot more in Korea, if this is true. So, yeah, there's that. So, yeah, interesting information. I think it'll be good. Korea will be a good place. And again, just like with real estate in the United States, I did real estate investing in the United States. Bunch of properties, it crashed and burned because family defrauded the company, and that's a whole nother story. I've talked about that in the past. But real estate can be a great investment vehicle, and it really helped us. Here in Korea, just like in the United States, it's going to be about location. So just because, I've had some people contact me that want to retire in Korea, kind of like what my wife and I are doing, and they're like, should I buy a condo? And it's like, I can't tell you that because, one, I don't know where you're going to retire. Two, even if you do tell me where you're going to retire, I'm not familiar with that area. I'm familiar with the area that I'm in, so I don't know if you're getting a good deal or not. You would have to do your own diligence and search the interwebs and Naver Real Estate to find out, to get a pulse, put a finger on the pulse of the real estate in that area. And I always buy at a discount. I never buy retail. It always has to be at a discount. So that way I can maximize the return that I get. So with that, I still think if you're in a good rental area, it can be a great investment, because real estate is going to go up, and eventually there's going to come a time of where, like what we're seeing in the future, it's predicted and it's going down, that they're not going to build as many new apartments as they have in the past. Completion of apartments is kind of going down as well, as kind of a knee-jerk reaction to what is going on with the economy and so on and so forth. The recession, all the stuff that's going on, and of course the bad exchange rate. Korea's not doing well, and so I don't think adding more debt to the coffers by the government is a way to go, in my opinion. But we've done that in the United States, and I didn't agree with that either, so whoop-de-doo. But I think real estate investing could be a good thing. It just depends on what and where you buy and how much you pay. Again, it's always going to be at a discount, and you must be willing, especially if you can buy it in all cash and buy it outright, then that is a great hedge, because people are always going to need a place to live. And let's say for example, I buy an apartment for about $165,000 in Asan Technical Valley, a 3-bedroom, 2-bath, and I rent that out. And it's a good rental area because it would be in an area that is frequented by military service members, their families, contractors that work at Camp Humphreys. That would be a good place, because it's, there's a bus stop there for the kids to go to the schools on the military base, great walkability. It's only like 15, 20 minutes away. It's really a choice city. With that, let's say I own the property, but let's say for some reason, eventually somewhere down the road, the U.S. military leaves Korea. And then it's like, oh no, the people that are going to be leveraged to the hilt and trying to rent out the property to cover the mortgage, that is going to go down, because there is usually set high rates, rent rates for military and contractors and their families and so on and so forth. So if the military left, there would be a huge gap, and then rent prices would plummet. When your property is paid off, yeah, you'll get less return on your investment, but it's paid off and you don't have to worry. So if I rent that property out for 1.4 million won, which is, I think that's kind of reasonable. Let's see, 14000, and we divide that by 1350. It's going to be about $1,000 a month. So anywhere from 14 to maybe 2 million won a month is probably on the higher end. Probably about 2 million won a month is what I could rent it for, minus 10% for management fee, because I'd have somebody else manage it. I don't want to deal with that problem. I'm making money. The property's paid off. I'm getting a high return on my investment. The United States military leaves Korea, rent rates go down to maybe $750. Yeah, I'm going to lose my the high interest. My return that I was going to get is low, but it's still paid off, and I'm still making money. And if your life is to where you are debt free, it's not really going to matter much, And especially if you have pensions, if you have like military pension, disability, Social Security, things like that. If you're able to survive on those things without having to have any debt, and no service debt or consumer debt, which we don't, a downturn in the economy is not bad for that type of real estate investing, because you can eat that. You have that wiggle room because the property's paid off. Whereas people in Korea, the reason that we got our property at such a good deal is because they had over leveraged and they couldn't pay, and so it's like we have to sell at a discount. So even though, and they really needed the money. So that's how we got such a good deal on this 4-bedroom, 2-bath. But boom, ours is paid off. So if the economy's bad, we'll just stay and live in it. You have to live somewhere. And usually if that's the case, if it's like, if we had to rent someplace, rent rates go up, when you can't buy a house, and kind of the same thing in the United States as well. So again, it's this relationship that we have. But if you're debt free, that can be a great vehicle in which to make some money. Of course, there's tax considerations and all of that. We talked about some of that in a previous video. Taxes for like pensions, 401ks, military pensions, Social Security, VA disability, IRAs, private company pensions, and things like that. We did a video on that. I'm not real smart yet on investment income for somebody like me, a foreigner who lives in Korea on a visa. Purchase a property, rent it out. I'm not sure of the tax considerations on that. Eventually, I have to get smart on that. But there's a lot of other expat retirees who live here who are doing this currently, and their wealth they're getting good returns on it. And eventually, if I die before my wife, she'll have a property she can live in, then she can have a property that she can rent out and make money on top of the other things that we have, and she'll be well provided for. So and then eventually, all of that will be passed on to our daughter. So that's what we got going on. Real estate, kind of a little bit of a recap. The good, there's real estate in Korea. There's different ways that you can rent. There's you can buy, and again, it depends on where you go. The property prices for the apartment that we're in, because it's so close to Camp Humphreys, Korea, is a little bit higher than normal, and they're proud of their prices here. So when we were able to get the discount, that was a really good thing. But don't feel like you're locked in to a certain area. You can get lower rent prices or lower purchase prices for real estate if you go away from those bigger city areas. But then again, there's that thing, you get older apartments, they might not have 110 voltage or some of the nice amenities that, we're used to. But then again, you're always going to make some compromises. And, I don't know. It's to me, I think it's going to be a good thing, and some other people as well. The bad, the economy's bad, and so that's going to have an adverse effect. I think Seoul, everybody wants to go to Seoul, so there's a lot of properties that are lower priced, and people just don't really care because they're chasing the won, and they're chasing the apartment and living in Seoul and so on and so forth. But then that's fueled by education, getting a good education for your children. So it's a whole different mindset in the world. The ugly is, I think eventually down the road, with the government reaching that debt cap that they have set for themselves, they're going to give away too much money, and you're not going to have a lot of investments. Eventually, we see a tightening of regulations, and so I think what we're going to end up seeing on the secondary market, I think, is going to be more loans, and then, excuse me, we might end up having another mortgage correction here in Korea like we did in 2008 in the United States. So I'm looking in my crystal ball, I'm thinking that the current administration in Korea is going to give away more money. Eventually they're going to kind of get to a place of what we did in the United States, affordable housing and giving loans to people that really weren't good credit risks, and that overinflated the real estate bubble, and eventually it came to a head. The secondary market, that blew up, the big bubble blew up, and then real estate prices dropped. I think we're going to see something like that possibly in the future. If we don't, no big deal. But in a bad economy, there's always good deals to be made. So if you're debt free and you have money, you can take advantage of those times. It's kind of like going to a garage sale. You go in the store and this price of this thing is full price, and you go to a garage sale, you get it 50-25% off. Kind of similar thing. I wish I could get property at a 50% discount. But yeah, it's going to be an interesting thing. So yeah, that's what we got going on. I thought I'd do a little explanation on real estate here in Korea. A little bit different than usual. Foreigners can buy real estate. I will reiterate that. You don't even have to be in Korea to buy real estate. But I just saw an article talking about how Korea wants to limit some of the real estate that it's selling to foreigners. And what basically what the article was talking about was a really interesting thing, because a lot of Chinese are buying up properties here in Korea and down in Jeju-do. So with that, in China, you can get a loan in China as a Chinese citizen and say, hey, I want to buy a property in Seoul, Korea, or I want to buy a property in Jeju-do or Busan or one of the big cities, Chinese banks will give loans so that you can buy those properties. And Korea is allowing Chinese to buy those properties. Now, is there any reciprocity on that? No. Koreans cannot get loans from Korean banks and go to China because China won't allow them to buy property. So there's some big contention going on about this, and Korea's talking about, well, kind of taking a play out of the Trump playbook is, well, if you don't let us buy properties, we're not going to let you buy properties. And so I think eventually there's going to be this head-to-head thing with Korea and China in regards to that. But they're talking about restricting the sale of properties to Chinese citizens because there is no reciprocity in that. Koreans can't buy property in China, so it's like, why are we doing this? Why are we giving away our land of our sovereign country to a country that won't let us buy land in their country? Tit for tat. So that is going to be very interesting. And then you have countries like Thailand and other places where foreigners cannot buy properties, or the Philippines, you can't buy property. You can buy the building, or you can buy like a condo or an apartment, but you can't buy the land. Some places you can lease the land for like a 50-year lease or something like that, but according to the laws that they have, foreigners can't buy the land. So is it, do you think Korea should go that far? I don't know. I'm a little biased because I'm a foreigner. I'm thinking about buying another apartment. So, I don't think it'll come down to this level because the article is just talking about China and Korea in regards to buying property. Hey, if you don't let us buy property in your country, why should we let you buy property in ours? And which is, actually, I think there's something to be said for that. And even in the United States, there's states that are talking about not allowing the Chinese or foreigners to buy property, like buying up tons of farmland. Take control of the farmland in another country. That has some huge implications, because once you corner the market on farming land in a country and it's owned by people of another country, you can hit them where it hurts. So, yeah, that will be a huge thing. That will be a huge thing going on. So anyway, that is what we have going on. Interesting times that we live in. Another thing, people ask me if I ever regret retiring here in Korea. It's been just over 2.5 years, and the answer is no, not yet. So will it? I don't know. But so far, we're enjoying it. We've been able to retire early because we retired overseas here in Korea, and that's mainly based because of the wife's ancestry. But that'll give us like a home base in which I can do my hobbies. We can go travel to other countries. We're planning on going to Vietnam this September, to Sapa. We're planning on going to the Philippines, but then the Philippines says you can't do streaming anymore, and it's just kind of this weird thing. So I don't know. I mean, I think we'll still go to the Philippines, kind of a cheaper version of Hawaii. It seems like they've got a lot nicer beaches and stuff, but we'll see how that goes. Yeah, so looking at taking some trips. Also thinking about going to Japan. What else? I want to go to Thailand. I want to go back to Thailand. We've been to Bangkok. We've been to Phuket. I want to go up to Chiang Mai and check that out and see what that's like up there. And try to do all this stuff. So the early retirement has been good. And there you have it. Yeah, real estate in Korea and a bunch of other stuff. So with that, we're going to close out this video. And if you can really help me out by like and subscribe to the channel, I would really appreciate that. That would be the number one thing that you could do. And if you could take time to do that, that would be great. With that, if anybody wants to contact me, there's my email address, and I 100% answer all of my emails. Might take me a couple days, but I answer every single email. And it can be about being in Korea, hobby stuff, or you just want to say hi, or just rant, or whatever. There's that. The other thing that you can end up doing is a solid for me is to buy me a coffee. And that's a scrolling ticker of all these people who are awesome because they bought me coffee. So I appreciate that. But if you can't afford that, I totally get it. Just like and subscribe. With that, we'll close out the video, and we will see you on the next one. Peace. Good times. Good stuff. Good stuff.